We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And today, recording day, is Tooth Day, apparently. Tom's son has definitely had tooth-related things. I won't go into specifics unless Tom wants to. And
I'll go into specifics.
I have quite the toothache going, so I am currently more ibuprofen than man, but that will be getting fixed up for me tomorrow after recording day. It will have already happened by the time you hear this.
What's wrong with you just have a toothache?
No, I only have one cavity out of all my teeth, but I don't normally have cavities, but when I do, it's a bad one. So something ain't right. I don't know if there's an abscess or if just the decay has gone deeper or what all, but yes, that is aching quite badly. But the ibuprofen is helping. Yeah.
So we had planned to have my eldest son's wisdom teeth out. They had suggested a while ago, and we put it off until summer because of obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And they called us yesterday and said we can move his appointment up by about a week and a half, which is good for him because he has plans. He has a summer job where he's going to go work at a Boy Scout camp for the summer. And he can't do that until he recovers from this. So getting this moved up by a week and a half means he can start work earlier, which means he can make more money over the summer. Which is good for him. But that means that you had no time. I didn't warn you about it because it wasn't coming. And he is now in the other room. And I was really hoping that this would be the start of my TikTok career. Launching my new brand on TikTok, of starting with my son babbling and crying or something. But he did a couple of funny things, but I didn't catch him on camera, and it was nothing funny enough for TikTok, I thought, or at least certainly not enough to go viral. But he is in the other room currently, not feeling very good. So my middle son is in charge of switching on and off the ice packs every 20 minutes while he sleeps. So he's on his prescription strength opiates.
Got some codeine?
I guess that. I think it's the bad one. What's the bad one? The Oxycontin.
Oh wow, you guys go strong. You don't mess around down there in the States.
I guess. I don't know. I'm gonna let him take them for the first 2 days, and after that I'm gonna be like, okay, dude, because they gave me Vicodin for my knee when I had knee surgery.
Yes.
They gave me something else, but then I was allergic to it, or I was having some sort of weird reaction, so they gave me Vicodin, and I thought, okay, well, it says take once every 6 to 8 hours or something like that, or as needed for pain. Yeah. So I was like, I'll be really good, and I'll only take it every 12 hours. Like I'll just power through. I'll use Advil or whatever else I need to get through for 12 hours because I don't want to be, I don't want to get hooked on this stuff like everybody talks about. How, I was just taking it for my pain. That's what the doctor said, and now I'm hooked. And, I was like, I'm smarter and stronger than that. I won't do that. So I ran out of Vicodin eventually, and I called them. I said, and I'm still in pain. They're like, oh, there goes the camera. Hey, Mike.
We knew it would happen. Hello, YouTube.
Yeah. And then I called them, and they said, we're not giving you any more. I'm like, oh, that's fine. That's fine. I guess I really don't need it. And next 2 days were hell.
Right.
I went through straight up withdrawals. Yeah. I was like, how?
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, how do I feel like this? I feel like I have a fever, I've got the shakes, I've got the chills, and I really was taking it like half as much as the doctor told me to. I'm like, they are way over prescribing this stuff. So anybody out there who's ever had a family member or whatever, and had somebody else come up to you and say, well, you don't have to get addicted, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, I kind of see it now.
Physical addiction is not a choice.
It's not something that you go out and you say, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm just going to take enough Vicodin I just get there. I'm going straight to... No, it's
not a willpower thing, So I take it your son must have gone general anesthetic for the wisdom teeth?
Yeah, he was out.
Oh,
he was
wow.
out. All four. All four. Well, I mean, I think it's sort of like a Twilight thing, but anyways, he was out enough that he was real groggy when I picked him up. But all four at the same time it's pretty serious. I did the same thing when I was a kid, and I don't think the procedures changed like one bit.
When I had all four of my wisdom teeth taken out, it was Novocaine and some Tylenol 3s. We go weak on the anesthetic.
Well, I think I was on codeine too when I was a kid, so I don't know why they're going so strong on this stuff now, but whatever. Gee. So I'll just keep it on lockdown, so I know where the pills are and he doesn't.
Also on lockdown, not your camera. That's
no. Hey, Mike.
I
got to do something about this camera situation. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what I'm going to do because
buy one with a functioning USB cable. That would be an option.
I want to say it's the USB cable, but when I plugged it into the other port, it was fine. The whole time, and I'm just afraid to use that other port for the the audio because the camera cutting off, annoying. The audio cutting in and out, catastrophic. We'll have to start over, so we can't do that. All right, this is AVRant the podcast. And, well, before we get going, I have instructed everybody that if something happens with my son in the other room, they are to get me. Right. Don't I don't know if I should go bother Dad. Yeah, bother Dad. So if I get up abruptly and leave and just abandon the podcast,
I shall vamp for a while and continue
my son is puking in the other room or something. All right. AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can go to contact Rob directly at rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. For those of you keeping score, I'm already sweating because I've been running around the house trying to get ready for this podcast, and now I'm hot. So take a shot. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, listen to last week's podcast. Yeah. Take a shot.
Yeah, we got a good response from that.
Yeah. So, I think DJ might be in the hospital. I think from listening to too many podcasts
Alcohol
back
poisoning.
to back. Mm-hmm. I can add a few to that list too.
Oh, everybody
for sure.
Could. Yes.
Oh yeah, there's a couple of things I know I do over and over again that you guys that would just destroy you.
Plenty of repetitive things.
Yeah. So. Let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you support the podcast in some way. If you want to do that financially, you can go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and send us a PayPal donation. PayPal will take most of your money and give it to us and keep a little bit for themselves for the trouble. So we want to thank Jack, Lance, and Different Jack. I don't think we've ever had two Jacks back-to-back before, but we had Jack, Lance, and Jack. They are different people.
Okay.
And went to AVRant and did that. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Jack, Lance, and Jack. The two Jacks with different last names. So there we go.
If you'd like to be a ongoing supporter, a monthly supporter of this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/AVRant Podcast, where you can sign up to be a contributing, ongoing, monthly listener/supporter. Hey, Mike. For the podcast. So patreon.com, it's a service that'll do that for you. So we want to thank our 124 current patrons over at patreon.com, including Daniel. It is Jack. I'm sorry. Daniel, Jack, and Andrew. And I don't know which Jack that is in relation to the other two Jacks, but I'm sure one of them crosses over.
Yes, indeed. That's patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. For anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, thanks very much to our 124 patrons over there. Daniel, Jack, and Andrew, thank you for being 3 of them.
I wish I could just force it to only use the one camera and then have it go black when that camera, something happens to that camera. So if you can't support us financially, just support us in some other way and let us know what you did, and we will mention you. So Gurinder wants to say a thank you to Ara, Brandon, and Carl for helping him with his JVC projector startup noise. He has emailed JVC and tried to get it sorted and was able to mention how all of these other owners weighed in thanks to our podcast. So he mentioned this to JVC, who may not like us as much as they did previous. Jack and Andrew sent me photos with permission to use them on AV gadgets. Some people have done, a couple of people have done that recently, and I haven't really gone through them. I have been very busy. So, like I said about my kid, with the wisdom teeth and pushing it to the end of the year, my wife pushed everything to the beginning of summer. So these first 2 weeks of summer, I'm like Uber dad, where not like Uber, no, more like driving the car Uber dad. So thank you, Jack and Andrew, for sending those photos, and thank you, Gurinder, for saying thank you to Ara, Brandon, and Carl, and for talking us up to JVC.
That's right, Gurinder. Very glad that was helpful to you. Thanks for talking us up. And Jack and Andrew, thanks for giving Tom permission to use your photos on avgadgets.com.
That's right. We got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Daniel, one of the other Jacks, or maybe it's the same Jack, Jay. Albert, he says he found us in August and wishes he had discovered us sooner. Well, we hide. I'm sorry. Shannon, Steven, Andrew says his wife also listens while he's watching on YouTube, and she says we provide the best information, I guess, compared to, I guess that's compared to somebody, not just like, yeah, this is pretty good. And Mike, he said he started listening after our Thanksgiving episode, and he's a longtime HT Guys listener. So Daniel, Jack, Jay, Albert, Shannon, Steven, Andrew, Andrew's wife, and Mike. Thank you very much for the notes of gratitude.
Yes, indeed. Daniel, Jack, Jay, Albert, Shannon, Steven, Andrew, Andrew's wife. We don't know your name, but hello. Hopefully we'll know your name in some time. And
do not want to just refer to people in relation to other people, but
yes,
it happens.
But so, that is currently the best way we have to identify you.
You are not a subset of Andrew. You are your own individual person with your own agency, and we're not trying to take that away from you.
And Mike as well. Don't want to leave you off. Thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions, even when Tom doesn't move.
That's right. Am I not moving again?
You are very stuck.
I'm very stuck.
On the wrong camera with a frozen face.
It's back on the right camera.
Oh, okay.
The right camera's
Skype
working
just
now.
Hasn't updated yet.
Oh, God. It's been like that for a while, though.
It sure has.
Whatever. I don't mind being frozen. Okay. In the news here, Vox International, the parent company of Klipsch, Yamo, Energy, RCA, and several other brands, along with Sharp, have agreed to buy Onkyo for $30.8 million, plus taking on Onkyo's debt. There's also a memorandum of understanding to acquire Onkyo's existing agreement to license the Pioneer and Pioneer Elite brands. A few years ago, Sound United was going to buy Onkyo, but that deal fell through because they said, why would we do this again? And then decided not to.
So I guess we have the Uber companies, the giant companies, Sound United versus Vox, more or less, because between those two, they're buying up everybody. But we'll see if this deal goes through. Onkyo supposedly had considerable debt, so that was a large part of the negotiation. I'm sure had a hand in Sound United not going through with the entire deal there years ago. But there we go. They might be part of the same company as Klipsch now.
I just, I don't know how I feel about all Sound. Like, Sound United has kind of shown they are. I switched my camera again to see if it would fix it. Has kind of shown that they leave autonomy within their umbrella companies. So, Denon and Marantz were already connected before they bought them. But you don't see Denon stuff showing up in Macintosh, or any kind of crossover that way. So, and I think they own Boston Acoustics as well. And Boston Acoustics is a very self-sustained company that, they make their own drivers sometimes when they, I've seen the facility that they use to make that. They're their own company now. I haven't seen much from Boston Acoustics recently, but, they must be doing something. So, I don't know how I feel about these large umbrella companies owning all these other companies, except that if it keeps them in business, then I'm happy, because
Sound
there
United
needs to be
owns,
more competition.
B&W now, Bowers and Wilkins, so that's a pretty huge acquisition that they made not that long ago. So yeah.
All right, this comes from Carl. The Alamo Draft House Theaters was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy during the pandemic, but they have refinanced by selling to an investment group, and that has allowed them to emerge from Chapter 11, reopen 40 of their existing locations, and move forward with their plans to expand to 5 new locations, including Manhattan and Washington, D.C. for the first time. Current capacity restrictions are still in place, but with a smaller number of seats available, their Los Angeles location was sold out for every single show across the 4-day Memorial Day weekend, and they're taking, which they're taking as a very positive sign that audiences are definitely eager to return to movie theaters. And you can literally color me shocked, because I would have been like, nah.
They said it was actually the first time that they had 4 days in a row where every single theater, every single movie, every single showing of every movie was sold out. for 4 days
That's
in a
crazy.
row. And now that isn't full
restricted seating.
It's not full capacity, so the number of tickets sold might be lower. But regardless, they're just like that seems like a positive sign. The first time they were able to do it after the pandemic, they completely sold out at their Los Angeles locations, their most popular. So that's a good sign.
And I mean that's a very populous area as well too. So shove that in the middle of I don't know Idaho, and let's see what actually happens. I mean, I think that as at least the United States seems to be emerging from the pandemic, though I keep warning my kids not to be shocked if you see outbreaks happening in this country relatively soon. I still have a son who's too young to even get a shot. So, in my house, the pandemic is not over. We act as if it's still going on simply because
globally,
we can't risk.
Certainly is.
Globally, yeah. So it's especially easy when you're looking around your own neighborhood and your own life, and you're not seeing the sort of things that other people are seeing. But I'm glad that that people are feeling comfortable enough to go out. I certainly have no desire to go to a theater again, and I really wish Cruella would have gotten better reviews because I definitely would have bought it. Yeah. But I am going to buy Black Widow without having looked at any reviews. Because I have to just to make sure that Marvel gets the message, I guess. This also comes from Carl, and if you think that almost everything we talk about could come from Carl, because Carl is relentless in his ability to ferret out news and send it on to the podcast. And I'm not making fun of Carl. I want to make that clear. I am thankful that Carl exists because we need people like Carl. AMC Theaters is looking to raise hundreds of millions of dollars so that it can acquire theater locations that were forced to permanently shut down, including ArcLight Cinemas, the previous owners of the Cinerama Dome, which I have been to, and I was not all that impressed by, especially when it's only down the street from the what do they call it these days? It's not Mann's Chinese, it's not Grauman's Chinese, it's something.
I don't know anymore. I don't know what
they call it anymore, but I feel like Chinese shouldn't be in there at all anymore. I feel like, but I mean, it is the motif that is going on in that thing, but that place rocks, and the Cinerama Dome was okay in comparison, not quite as good. I saw the Bruce Willis movie, the Under the Blister in the Sun or something under the sun, where I don't remember. It was a military movie where he had to get some far too hot to be an actual person, doctor out of some war-torn country, whatever. It was okay. Okay, so AMC is selling 8.5 million shares to Mudrick Capital to raise the funds, but there's another crazy wrinkle in this whole transaction. AMC's share price hit a low of about $2 per share, but Mudrick is set to pay $27.12 per share, and that's because the Reddit group Wall Street Bets, who famously or infamously pumped GameStop stock to ridiculously high levels via a short squeeze, have done it again with AMC stock price, albeit to a lesser degree than GameStop. So AMC stocks is artificially high right now, but Mudrick is betting it will all pay off as theaters reopen. AMC is looking to take over ArcLight locations to expand it even further. Can we all be surprised that Apple didn't buy all these places already, or Amazon? I kind of feel like Amazon
is the one I was thinking might really do it.
Yeah.
But so far they haven't. I don't know. There's still some legal things about owning both a studio and theaters. There's still some legal issues restricting that.
But isn't there that one Disney theater in Los Angeles? I cannot remember the name of it. That plays nothing but Disney movies. I've been there. I saw
But is that actually owned by Disney? That's the thing.
I don't know. Yeah. Maybe they're just a big time partner. I can't remember the name of that theater. I saw Finding Nemo there. Which was was great. Via mic, Plex users who use an Xbox as their playback device are in for a little treat. The audio actually works. Not. Xbox insiders who are part of the alpha ring, meaning they get to test the newest but also least staple updates, now have access to a new Xbox audio setting, I knew it was audio, that allows for bitstream audio pass-through at all times, not just for the physical disc playback. I feel like he said this to us before. I feel like he's told us something along these lines.
I don't think this one came up before.
I've been promised that they've been going to fix this Xbox thing for a long time, and it hasn't happened. So I don't believe it. But anyways, Plex was right on the top of that. So Plex, the Plex app for Xbox is finally able to send out Dolby True HD plus Atmos and DTS HD Master Audio plus DTS-X. Hopefully that setting will arrive for all Xbox users in the near future, and I will believe it when I see it. And I think, DJ, you're up to 3 or 4 shots at this point. And you know what? Xbox sucks. There's a 5th one. There you go.
Yeah, I mean,
starting off strong.
The more devices we have that can actually do the full complement of what Plex is capable of doing, because really, other than a computer, it's been the NVIDIA Shield. That has been the one. So it would be very nice to have another one. There's no reason on a processing ability level why the Xbox One and Xbox Series shouldn't be able to do it. So it's just been a matter of getting that full bitstream pass through, and that is coming. It's in the alpha ring, and that'll go into the beta ring, and then eventually come to everybody.
I hope so. I don't believe it. It's the 6th one, DJ. Take a shot. Comments here. Andrew wanted to share the final results of his theater build. He asked us a bunch of questions over a year ago, and he's also been very active on AVS Forum, and he sought out consulting advice. He has a large budget, but didn't want to waste a penny. Every purchase was made with the goal of maximum value. He still spent a lot on speakers and his projector, as well as on the construction, HVAC, and electrical for the room, but he spent remarkably little on other items because it simply wasn't necessary to spend any more, and we were a big help with that. His original idea was JBL synthesis on the cheap, and he spent the bucks and got JBL's master reference M2 monitors up front, along with crown amplification all around. But instead of the $30,000 JBL synthesis processor, he went with a price monolith HTP1 and a less expensive JBL and Revel speakers all for all the other positions. His 2 enormous subwoofers up front evened out by a 3rd subwoofer at the back that was custom built into the seating riser. And instead of JBL's expensive Arco system, a mini DSP handles the subwoofer EQ duties. He went whole hog with a Christie 4K projector, installed a custom hush box. He never wanted this room to be pitch black bat cave. I'm going to say that 5 times fast. So he went with a high contrast ambient light rejecting screen material with micro perforations. Yeah, I'm saying that right. Perforations. Perforations. There it is. There it is. She sells. I need to do that more. With micro perforations from Severton. Anyways. But he still put it in a silver ticket frame.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why spend more? It's a very nice frame.
I have to take a sip after that one. We had a hand in getting him to consult with Ted White from Soundproofing Company that ended up saving him loads of money, but he still did extensive soundproofing for the walls and ceiling, but the floor didn't need to be nearly as complicated as he had originally envisioned, and he's very happy with the end result. We also helped with his final HVAC decisions, and he ended up going with a mini split system with some additional mufflers that keep the noise to an absolute minimum. Paint is all Sherwin-Williams gray and black with white trim, just as we recommend. And perhaps our biggest influence, he settled on just using a 16:9 aspect ratio screen. Let's go. He originally had all sorts of ideas about a 2.35:1 screen or a constant image area with complicated forward masking. In the end, he did none of that. Just a 150-inch 16:9 screen with his primary row 12.5 feet away, and he's very happy with the results. Holy crap, those are some big speakers.
Indeed they are. Those are JBL's M2 master reference studio monitors. That's like their
I love the raw insulation behind it. He's just like, just throw it up there like they said. Just throw it up there. No one cares. No one's going to see it.
I love the consultation with Ted White over at Soundproofing Company, and that, turning out, I mean, they will recommend what you need to do to reach the soundproofing levels that you want. And he's like, here's what you need to do. Here's what you don't need to do. And wound up ultimately saving a bunch of money with that. So, I mean, gorgeous looking theater. Really did spend big bucks on the front speakers and on that Christie 4K projector. Those are very expensive items, but I love using a silver ticket frame on a more expensive screen material. He probably had to buy the entire thing, like silver ticket frame and screen, and just
threw the screen
rid
away.
Of the screen material. He's got a backup if something ever goes wrong.
Oh yeah, that one in the garbage. I'm actually surprised that the subwoofer built inside the platform isn't more of an issue, but I guess you could have done. I mean, if you not isolate, but if you decouple the couch, the back couch, which is just a regular couch, he's got 3 home theater seats, and then he's like, put the couch back there. Who cares who sits?
And it's kind of a 2-level riser, so we don't know what's going on inside. We can't see inside for the structure, so could be quite a complicated thing inside there.
Yeah, so usually you put a subwoofer in there and it shakes the whole thing. You're going to feel the vibrations, but I guess if you decoupled the feet of the couch from the floor,
it's possible.
Somehow, that would limit the amount of vibrations that would go through. But maybe you didn't. Maybe you liked it. So, it looks really nice.
Really
nice theater. It's very, very nice. Okay. Lance has a discussion about his dual subwoofer setup where he tried moving his PC12 Plus, which are almost as good as mine, cylinders, to the midpoints of his sidewalls, and EQing with DRAC and the mini DSP was terrific. His wife usually sits in the middle seat in the back row because she finds the field of view too large in the front row. So that's why that seat is definitely important. He also says we don't need to worry about the extension cord for his projector that goes inside the walls. It is actually proper Romex that was installed by his contractor. Good. He just thinks of it as an extension and always calls it that, so there's no safety hazard there. That's fine.
Yes.
I do terminology like crap like that all the time. And, I know what I'm talking about. The fact that you don't is your problem, not mine. So I completely understand that. But when the way you phrased it, you can see where we just wanted to make sure. We don't want anybody to go, we don't want anybody to hear that and have them say, oh, well, he put it, and they were fine with it. So I'll just put an extension cord in my wall. So while we were discussing the measurements he sent in, he was also talking with SVS. The topic of resonance came up, and they suggested giving it a try with his cylinder subs in sealed mode instead of ported mode. He didn't have the port plugs on hand, so they set them some for free because SVS rocks. Strictly for practical purposes, having both subs in the front corners is still preferred, and happily, sealing the subs made an improvement. The side wall placement was still a bit better for the back row, but with the sealed subs and positioned in the front corners again, the back row isn't nearly as bad as it used to be. So that is the final compromise they've settled on. He had always assumed that sealing the subs would take away too much of the deepest space, but his room is under 3,000 cubic feet, and SVS assured him that output and extension would be ample, and they were right. So if you're looking at YouTube, there's the old front corner response, and then we have a new front corner response, and you can see the purple line on the old response and the yellow line on the new response are identical, except not as extreme.
The shape is the same, but the shape is the same. To which the peak goes up and the null goes down are
way better.
Much improved now with the subwoofers sealed instead. We can compare it to when he had the subwoofers at the midpoints of the two side walls, and then also manually applied some correction after that, we have to mention. But that was, just objectively looking at the measurements, the best of all. But, perfectly makes sense that practical wise, where walkways are, the two subs at the front of the room just make the most sense. And he's like, as long as I can get this reasonable, the old result, not reasonable in that back seat.
Right.
That is completely unreasonable. Right. The new result, reasonable. So he's very happy with that.
And this is one thing that I know I've been talking about Reddit a lot lately, is because I basically, when I run out of ideas of things to write on AV gadgets, I go to Reddit and see what people are asking about, because if they're asking about it, other people are asking about it. So, and if I find it to be a question that I think other people might be interested in, I answer it. But that's one of the things I see all the time is people are like, oh, that's not, your TV is too high. I'm like, you have no way of knowing that, from his actual sight lines or their actual sight lines. And second, shut up. just shut up. So what he's done is he said, okay, this is not sounding right. And we said, from the science and from everything we know from, over a dozen years doing this podcast, this is where you put your subwoofers and they'll sound the best. And he put them there and he's like, yep, they sound the best, but I don't want them here. Yeah. So what can I do? Yeah. Well, and then he found something else and he's like, this is good enough. That's perfectly fine. I'm not going to walk into his theater. I would walk into his theater and say, have you ever tried putting the subs over here? And he's like, yeah, I tried it, but we like them better up there, and we measure the response. Or even if you said that, we like them better up there, and it sounds good enough in all the seats that I'm just going to leave them there. I'm like, okay, fine, good. That's what you got to do sometimes. You can't always have. Yes,
we have to live in the real world.
People are like, oh, can you move your ceiling fan? I'm like, no, I can't move my ceiling fan. What do I look like? I've got a flat roof. I can't move my ceiling fan. whatever. So, you have to live with what you've got, and aesthetics are important.
Yes.
You have to be able to walk in this room and not have people go in there and go, yeah, I'm not going in there because it looks like you torture people in that room. You can't, that's when people are like, oh, you should paint the entire room front, black, everything's black, floor is black, everything's like, you can't do that because people will get freaked out, and then you might get it, but nobody else will. Aesthetics matter. And if somebody comes to me and said that I listened to 2 speakers and I bought these because they're prettier, I'm like, good.
Yep.
Pretty matters. Daniel has a BenQ HT3550i projector. That's the refresh version that comes with Android TV built in, and he's absolutely loving it. Loving it. That's a commercial or something. I can't remember. His sources are an NVIDIA Shield TV Pro and the Oppo 203 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. At the moment, he has plugged both sources into his Marantz SR6011 receiver, and then the projector. But he has noted that the Oppo player offers 2 things. First, a target luminance setting, and second, an HDMI input in addition to his 2 outputs. He used a nit calculator to figure out that his BenQ ought to be putting out something close to 100 nits when it's in HDR mode. So he set 100 nits as the target luminance on his Oppo 203, and I feel like that was a mistake, but we'll find out in a second. He asks, is this correct? Will that allow his Oppo to output the best possible signal for his BenQ projector?
I guess it's me answering.
Yeah, you think I was going to do it when I just guessed that it was wrong a second ago?
So going back to the Oppo, this is a little bit of an interesting thing because the Oppo players do not have what the Panasonic players have, which is the HDR optimizer. The Oppo players do not take an HDR signal and tone map it ahead of time and then send that out to your display. That's what the Panasonics do with their HDR optimizer. They take an HDR10 signal, they use the metadata that's part of HDR10, and then they tone map it ahead of time and send that out to your display. But the Oppos don't. That target luminance setting, and it is a little bit weird that it's like available at all times because it only applies when you are either using the Oppo's HDR to SDR conversion or the strip metadata feature.
Okay.
That's the only times when that target luminance applies. But you can adjust the target luminance all the time. It's not like grayed out until you select one of those 2 output modes. It's always there. So unless you have activated, I forget whether they label it as HDR off or SDR, like just it's SDR all the time, standard dynamic range all the time. One of those 2 things, I forget the way it's exactly labeled in the menus. But unless you've activated that or the strip metadata feature, then that target luminance setting isn't doing anything. It only applies to those 2 things. Now, the reason that was a big deal when the Oppos were like the only game in town is because when we had projectors that could technically do HDR, but were really bad at it, the very first ones, just converting everything to standard dynamic range was like the best we could do. And the strip metadata feature was really popular because that one would get rid of the HDR10 metadata, as we would expect.
Right.
So the projector would treat it like it was standard dynamic range, but you would still get the wide color, which normally if you set it to SDR only, then it goes back to Rec 709 color, and you don't get the wide Rec 2020 color. The strip metadata retains the wide color but gets rid of the HDR flag, so it stays in SDR. So that was popular with projectors that really couldn't handle HDR very well. They were technically compatible but didn't do a good job of tone mapping. But the Oppo was never tone mapping anything. It was all about HDR to SDR conversion. So ultimately, the HT3550, it does a pretty good job of tone mapping HDR itself as long as it is 1000 nit. HDR. Now, the thing is, pretty much all of the streaming service HDR that you're going to get is 1000 nit HDR. And I would be very comfortable just letting your BenQ handle that. So I would not plug your NVIDIA Shield into the Oppo and then have the Oppo convert the Shield's HDR to SDR.
You're answering the next question. I didn't get to read it
yet. Sorry. I forgot that was there. I knew it was coming. You want to read it so that I'm answering?
No, go ahead. You already started answering, and people can figure this out for themselves.
Exactly, yeah. So he was going to ask, should he plug his NVIDIA Shield into the Oppo? it doesn't make sense to take 1000 nit HDR coming out of the shield, plug that into the Oppo, have the Oppo convert that HDR to SDR so that you can use its target luminance setting. That doesn't make sense. Just send the 1000 nit HDR out of the shield into your receiver as you're doing. The receiver passes it to the BenQ, and the BenQ does its own HDR 1000 nit tone mapping. It'll do a great job of it. On the Oppo, when you're playing discs, I mean, I guess if you've got a disc that was mastered to 4,000 or 10,000 nits and you're noticing that it looks all blown out, you could try stripping the metadata and see if it looks better. I mean, it's a setting. There's no reason you can't toggle back and forth. It's fine to leave it with its target luminance to 100 nits if that is about what your BenQ is doing. That's all fine. You can give it a try. It's not going to hurt anything. But yeah, what your BenQ will do is just stay in its SDR picture mode at that point. Yeah, so that's about it. I can give you a couple links. One is Forbes when they were describing what that target luminance setting does, because that got added via firmware at one point. And then another one is just a video by Vincent Teo over at HDTV Test, where he directly compares the Panasonic and the Oppo and kind of goes through the settings there.
Right. So back in the day when Oppo first... We talked about this a lot, about this Oppo pass-through where they could do video conversion and up conversion and, you know, all these things to external signals. And when we were when HDR was really first hitting projectors, it was not great. Mm-hmm. So we were looking for workarounds, and it was a highly desired stuff. Yeah. But again, just like anything else, and this will happen with HDMI 2.1 and the 4K 120 and 8K 60 or whatever that people are complaining about, VRR, all these other things. As we move forward, these things will all settle down, and then the device will go from, oh, everybody use a HD Fury to fix it, to I just plug it in, it's fine. And that's good. That's where we are now with the Oppo. What the Oppo was doing was very needed when it came out, but it's no longer really needed. Yeah. Jack. So Jack is back, sharing some more photos of his basement theater build with his false wall up front and crazy collection of multi-6 driver subwoofers. He's got 3 of them that have 6 drivers. And
3 of them across the front and another one on the left wall. There's 4 of these there's 4. That's right. I keep thinking that middle one is a center channel for some reason. First up, he wanted to share his solution for wall mounting his surround speakers as flush as possible, while still giving them the ability to be swiveled and aimed a bit. He used TV wall mounts that are meant for the smallest screen sizes, and it worked like a charm. So it's an itty-bitty tiny wall mount. Yeah. He must have screwed it. I guess there's a plate that he attaches to the back. Yeah, it's like a 100 millimeter by 100 millimeter Visa mount. So on the speakers he's using, that worked. He just screwed them straight into the backs of the cabinets, but
which is fine.
That gave him pretty close to a flush mount, but still with the ability to aim the speakers the way that he wanted. So that's a tip.
So he also followed the advice to install a male inlet in his equipment closet that runs power up to his projector from the APC battery backup in his rack. So he's got that. So I've never seen one that looks like that, but that works.
Yeah, it looks like it's a exterior, like one that would have had a flap that goes over, but he's just removed the flap. So in case people have heard us talk about a male electrical inlet but aren't quite sure exactly, didn't picture it, then you can see it on YouTube or on the Flickr follow along, and that runs inside the wall up to the power outlets that are up where his projector gets mounted.
Yes. And then there's a bunch of pictures. Scroll past. He's very happy with the way the equipment rack and closet keeps the spaghetti mess of wires organized and out of sight. Well, they don't keep them organized, but they do keep them out of sight. You keep them organized. Mine are not organized at all. This is way better than mine. Anyway, so he's got a question here. Or maybe questions, I don't know. Aesthetics are a high priority, and the back of his theater area is open to the kitchenette. The rear portion of the left side is also open to another section of the basement. Thankfully, there's a door at the top of the basement stairs. So all in all, he's dealing with about 5,500 cubic feet. Well, you know what you should get is like 4 big subwoofers with 6 drivers each. Put them in there.
Should have output covered.
Have you thought of that? He says he doesn't have a lot of places to put acoustic treatments. That is not true. You got lots of places. You just don't want to put them there. Maybe a single panel on each side wall and essentially nothing else that would be visible. He was hoping his false wall could pretty much do all the heavy lifting. It's 2.5 feet from the physical front wall for the framing of the false wall. How should he acoustically treat that empty space, keeping in mind he wouldn't want to block the drivers of his front wall subs? I don't think anything's going to bother. I think you could fill that whole thing with insulation and the base would still come through just fine. But yes, I think you should fill that whole thing with insulation.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, okay, leave the openings in front of the woofers, but I just don't think really, this doesn't work the way that like, let's say that you could put 30% of insulate of the absorption you need all on one wall. That would not work. I mean,
Indeed, yeah.
It would to a certain
it would
extent,
help cut down reverberation time in the room overall. It would help.
Yeah.
It'd be certainly better than nothing.
But it would not work the way that having 30% of the walls and ceilings and floors with absorptive material would work if you did it the proper way.
And now you mentioned ceiling, because to me that's the other place that you definitely could. He's put in this. What is the term for that? Where you have the sort of soffit ridges that come down across.
I don't know.
There's a term for that.
There is a term for that. It's like no, I don't want to say parquet, but that's that.
But he basically has these wells in his ceiling all over the place. Now, he's got recessed lighting in basically each one of the wells that are created by this crisscross soffit pattern that he's got up there. But there's definitely space, like all the perimeters of all of those wells in the ceiling there. I mean, that could all be, absorption in what is the ceiling to soffit corners, right? All of that could have treatment in there. So, I mean, that could go a long way.
Like if you thought of them as trapezoids.
Sure.
And you, instead of, because right now they're rectangles, right? So if you put a triangle of insulation material with a fabric covering that went inside each one of those bays all the way around the outside,
or even if you made it like what we would call soffit traps, but they're inside of the soffits that already exist, basically just making each one of those wells a smaller rectangle, so the light would still be there in the middle and be able to shine down, but you just sort of decrease the visual size of each of those ceiling wells. Then you could have acoustic treatment in there, and that would be a help because you've got this big bare hard surface floor, so you're getting no help from the floor, but you could make the ceiling a big help.
A rug would not kill anything in here, that's for sure. But
it's not going to really do a whole lot either. But so I mean, it makes perfect sense. No, you're not going to treat the kitchenette. Whatever's going on, to the left of the open portion. Okay, that is what it is. Maybe there's some places you could put some insulation there just to cut down reverberation times a little, but that's fine if that's untreated. So I would target on the ceiling. I would do as much as you can on the side walls as possible. Hopefully 2 panels, like a 4 foot by 4 foot section would be okay. I don't really see why it has to only be one. You can make it complementary or just blend into the wall color that's already there. But then he went a little bit further about what he wanted to do on that front wall.
Oh, I gotta scroll down here. Okay. There's 4 feet of wall in between each one of those front wall subwoofers. So should he buy 24-inch wide insulation to cover the physical front wall, or should he maybe get cheaper 16-inch insulation since material costs are crazy high right now, and stack the batts of insulation floor to ceiling, maybe give it a little bit of structure with some leftover pieces of scrap lumber? I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so scroll back up if you're looking at the whatever pictures, and there's the guy who has the false wall. Where is it? There it is. And he just has like insulation that looks like it's all just kind of
that's going back.
The pink stuff that's behind all of his speakers. Do that, but between your speakers.
Okay.
I'm honest with you. I know that you're not going to believe me, but you could fully fill in front of your sub so that it wasn't touching. You could fully fill that with insulation, and the bass would still come out. Okay, so I know you don't want to, and that's fine. I mean, I know that mentally you're like, I can't put things in front of the drivers. Why would I do that? Well, you could. It's not gonna. The bass is gonna come through just fine. But if you don't want to, I would literally like you said, like I would just make a box of just stick framing, like 1x material, floor to ceiling, that goes in between each one of those speakers or those drivers, and fills up anything else that you can, and then just like take that pink insulation, if it's got backing on it, rip the backing off and throw it in there until it's full.
Yeah,
just go all
much
the
as
way
you
to the
can,
top.
basically. You can't
Don't compress
overdo it in this room. So
yeah, don't compress it. Just throw it in there.
Sure,
but that's what I would do.
Right, go for as much as you can, not just a single piece of rock wool insulation, 3.5 inches thick, just lining the 4x4 section. No, as much as you can.
So he also has a cavity under the stage at the front of the room, but no real way for air to move in and out. So would be any benefit to stuff that with insulation? Benefit? I mean, it's just I guess. I mean, I'd hope it'd be inert enough that it's not going to make noise. It's not going to vibrate.
Yeah, actually, we're in that regard, we're only caring about, is there going to be a resonance inside of the stage? This isn't going to act as a bass trap. If the air can't move in and out of it, it's not going to act as a bass trap. We're only concerned with, will the stage actually resonate without insulation? So
right, and so if there's no way for air to get in and out, what you're worried about is the stage itself flexing. With the bass waves and then somehow creating noise in your room. If it doesn't do that, then there's nothing really more to be done.
Agreed.
And so and then he's asked what should we do up front? Well, we already said what you should do. So do it. Will recently moved some furniture in his room, and he also added an external amp to his Marantz SR6011 to power his front, left, and right towers. He did that before asking us because he knew what our answer would be. It would require a DJ to take another shot. So with those changes done, he reran Audyssey. He used the Audyssey mic that came with the Marantz, and before it got to the full suite of chirps and moving the mic around, it wanted to check the subwoofer output levels. It initially reported that his dual subs were a bit too loud, 80 to 81 dB, and told him to lower their volume knobs a little bit, which he did. But he also double-checked the readings with his Triplett SoniCheck MC1 SPL meter. It's a small, inexpensive SPL meter, but it's C-weighted, and we've recommended it before. He made sure to put it right beside the Audyssey microphone, and it was reading the subwoofer test signal as only 70 to 71 dB when Audyssey was saying it was 80 to 81. Regardless, he followed Audyssey's advice, and at the end, he set his master volume to 0 dB, much louder than his typical setting, and watched a movie. His understanding is that it should have been hearing full reference volume, which ought to be an average of 85 dB with 105 dB peaks, correct? Well, his Triplett SPL meter was reading between 98 and 108 the entire time. So any ideas why his Triplett SPL meter is reporting such a difference? First, it's saying the bass is quieter than what Audyssey mic was saying, and then it's saying the whole movie never got quieter than 98 dB when it shouldn't have been the case, right? So what's up? Well, I don't know what movie you're watching, so let's just start with that. Without knowing what movie you're watching, and because there's never been a movie that I have watched that didn't have a scene that was basically silent. So I can't imagine that it's always 98 dB because that would be insanely loud. Yeah,
and I don't imagine
constantly.
He was literally watching the SPL meter the entire time. Plus, that little Triplett does have a thing where it retains the peak value that was measured, so maybe he was just looking at that and that never changed, but you have to manually reset it every time, so there could have been something going on in there. So
the difference between a 70 to 71 and an 80 to 81 dB reading is pretty significant. That's
but that was bass only. Right, that was the subwoofer test signal, which is bass only, and a C-weighted SPL meter doesn't really register much below 80 hertz. C weighting basically goes from about 80 hertz to about 5,000 hertz. That's sort of the range that C weighting is relatively accurate over. Now, we do that because the alternative is A weighting, which is 500 hertz and up. It's 500 to 2,500 hertz. It's a really small range. In A weighting, it's just the vocal range. That's what A weighting is concerned with. So C weighting is preferable to that, but the mic that Audyssey is using, or if you were using a UMic 1 with your MIQ Wizard or something, that's what they would call Z weighting, Z weighting, or no weighting at all, which is that it isn't rolling off the highs or the lows. So having the SoniCheck, now, we don't actually know which way the microphone was facing. We'll assume pointing straight up, but sometimes that can make a difference. Or if he was hand holding it beside. I was
going to say, he was probably in his hand when he was doing it too. Yeah. So that makes a big difference as well.
To do just a spot check rather than the SPL meter also being mounted on a tripod next to the. So, it's both
a plethora.
Insensitive and sensitive. It's kind of remarkably sensitive to the surroundings and what's holding it, and then it's also not as sensitive as a measurement microphone. It's there to give you a rough idea. So I don't actually think we're necessarily way out to lunch here, because the other bit of information is that full reference volume in the bass can have peaks as high as 115 dB. Yeah. So having the peak level that the SPL meter measured while the movie was playing being between 98 and 108, that's actually entirely possible. If that's the peaks that it was reading, that's actually entirely possible. And then having it reading lower when it's subwoofer only, well, that's largely because it is the C weighting there. So it's an imprecise thing. It's there to get you a ballpark, but you don't have to put a whole lot of stock into what your SPL meter.
Well, that's one of the reasons too. When you do the okay, so there's a couple things I want to say, but when you're using the test tones, it's one long test tone. It's like the little chirp things.
Yeah,
and that's because they're assuming you're using some sort of SPL meter, and it needs to hear it for a while, but because it takes that average, which is what the weighting, the C weight average is. It takes that average so it can kind of get an idea of exactly where you are. The chirps are a lot, even though he said he wasn't using the chirps, but still, it's a different type of measurement. Like Rob said, with your holding your hand or holding it in your hand, I never thought that was that big of a deal until I literally saw the needle jumping as I would move the thing closer and further away from my body. As I was like, okay, I'm never touching this thing again. Always set up on the tripod and stood as far away from it as my old eyes can stand. But I think the number one thing that should have, or that you could have used to test all of this and find out whether or not this Audyssey SPL, who was right, is 10 dB is big.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a significant enough difference that once you finished running Audyssey and you turned on a movie, you should say the bass is too loud by 10 dB. Like, you can test that right now, depending on where your subwoofer trim levels are set in your receiver. You can just bump up the trim levels 10 by whatever. If it's like -3, put it up to +7 and see how much louder that sounds. And it's not going to be like, oh, I think I can hear. No, it's going to be like, geez.
Play a sweep that starts in the mid-range or treble,
right,
and goes all the way down to the bass. And if you hear this huge rise, like, this is at full reference volume we're talking, so make sure it's a significantly quieter test tone. Don't send out a 105 dB sweep. Send out a 75 or an 85 dB sweep, but play that sweep, and I mean, if there is this obvious 10 decibel rise in the bass, then you'll know that your SPL meter was more accurate than the Audyssey microphone.
Right.
But in terms of, being, perfectly reasonable question. He's like, hey, both of these things are supposed to be, helping me calibrate, and they're giving me some pretty wide results. Like I said, I never put too much stock into what an SPL meter tells me, because it's a weighted device. It's a rather imprecise device. If you are using it handheld, it can be quite inaccurate. It's there to give you a really rough ballpark idea, and it's not a terribly precise measurement tool.
We used it because that's what we had. Sure. We didn't have anything else. We didn't have Audyssey and these other automatic room corrections. And even when they first came out, again, like we were just talking about with HDR and HDMI 2.1, when they first came out, the room correction system, we were like, I don't know, man, something weird's going on here. And you double check it. But again, it's like Rob said, it can be precise enough for what just to level match your speakers. It can be certainly precise enough to do that, but you just have to be a little careful. Alber recently did a full audio system upgrade. He previously had 30-year-old Polk speakers and a single 10-inch Klipsch sub, all powered by an old Onkyo receiver. This is in a theater area that is 18 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 9 feet high, and it's completely open on the left side to his kitchen and dining room area, so it's 1 million cubic feet. 1,000 million. So after his upgrades, he's now rocking a Denon X4400H receiver plus a 2-channel Crown XLI amp, Polk LSI series speakers all around, and dual Klipsch reference R120 SW subs. Those are 12-inch subs with 200-watt amps. That spec extension down to 29 hertz at -3 dB. That's right. He is wondering whether he ought to upgrade the subwoofers even further. Yes, but let's go on. I'm sorry.
Quick answer. You know what's coming.
Just sorry. He appreciates that we tell people not to mess with their systems too much if they're already enjoying the sound, but the problem is that he thought his old system sounded pretty good, but then he did this upgrade and it's night versus day better. So he's wondering if it's the case that he doesn't know what he's missing. He's got a blank 25-foot wall in front of him that's got his 80-inch Vizio TV on it, plus his front speakers, his TV stand, and both Klipsch subs. He knows he says not to put both subs up front, but they look best this way. And as far as he can tell, the bass sounds pretty even across his seats. And despite his room size, they play plenty loud enough for him. Behind him, he's got 4 windows. So his right side, he's got a fireplace and built-in shelves. The left side is open to the kitchen and the dining room area. Yep. So he'd be willing to purchase 2 SVS 2000 Pro series subs. If he were to do front wall, back wall placement, he'd go for a cylinder behind his couch and a box up front. But should he replace his dual clip subs entirely, or should he just add them? Do not add them. Maybe just a single PC 2000 Pro behind his couch for a total of 3 subs, keeping the dual clip subs up front. Nope. What do we think he should do, and how much of an upgrade should it be? Would it be? Okay. So you are already missing quite a few frequencies. Yeah, just in general, octave, right? So you're at the very least, if you get, even if you just took the clips and compared them, frequency response wise to any sub in the SVS lineup, you're missing 10 dB. I mean 10 hertz.
10 hertz.
You're missing all the way down to 20 hertz, plus a little bit. So all that low bass is gone. So you do not know what you're missing, yes, because your 10-inch clip sub wasn't getting anywhere near there either.
Right. We do have to keep in mind, though, that being an open room,
yes,
getting audible, noticeable response right down to 20 hertz could make it potentially unpleasant in the rest of the house.
Well, that's so okay. So this is where I'm going to be probably a little, I want to say, it's going to be a little controversial.
Okay.
I'm going to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. First of all, I do not believe that you have sat in every seat on that couch and it all sounds good. I believe it sounds good at the seat that you've sat at and maybe one other one.
Okay.
Or maybe when you're lying down. Okay?
And maybe he hasn't been listening to sweeps on repeat like a crazy person like I would.
That's right. Right. So I would say that it probably doesn't sound as good as you're telling us, and that's fine.
But also because, once again, the room is wide open, having both subs at the front of his theater area, that's not the same thing as having both subs on the front wall of an enclosed space.
He's basically co-located these. He's got one sub.
Yeah.
It's up front, and
for a lot of
one
frequencies,
sub
yes.
For a lot of the frequencies, which is fine.
Yes.
But he's got a very big room that he's trying to fill with bass. So by co-locating them, essentially, he's getting 6 dB more output at the very least. Coming out, so he can get a lot louder than, not a lot, but he can get louder than the one single sub would do. And if he were to take 2 PC 2000 Pros and put them on the other side, each side of the room, or from each other, now now they're separated far enough that you're not getting that. You're only getting 3 dB boost, and they're trying to play these very, very low frequencies that he's not going to be able to fill this room with bass anyways. So,
but they would actually be at least producing those lowest frequencies, whereas current subs are really
which
not
might not actually be something you
that
want.
Noticeable. Yeah. And if you do turn them up loud enough to be noticeable, yes, the rest of your house might be complaining every time it goes
right.
off.
And not only that, I mean, it's almost one of these things where in the open space, and he doesn't have any room treatments, and is probably unlikely to get any. If he made all these changes and everything seems to magically fall into place, so it's not so bad, because his back couch is not against. No, it's not. I would just be like, ooh, I don't want to touch anything, because if you start exciting some lower frequencies, you might start finding, that you're in a null, or you're in a boost, or it starts vibrating weird things around your house.
Other noises that happen in the house because of it. Yeah, that is entirely possible. He's got things on the shelves to the right side where the fireplace is. Something starts rattling that isn't rattling now. That's very
definitely
possible.
Definitely a possibility.
So we can tell you this. We can tell you objectively, there are some sounds that you're not getting right now. They exist.
That's right.
You could produce them with lower extension, higher output subwoofers. Definitely there are models in SVS's lineup that could do that for you, that could produce those frequencies for you. But it's not all good. There are some potential drawbacks, mainly just because this is a wide open, clearly multi-purpose room, right? This isn't an enclosed rectangle that is a theater and nothing else.
So if you wanted to do this, we have no idea how much cubic footage you're actually dealing with here,
we
but
don't know.
it looks like a lot.
It looks like it could be a lot. Yes.
I don't think a 2000 series is enough for this space just by what I can see.
And we're talking to actually fill 20 hertz here.
Yes.
In that terms. Yeah.
I mean, I would be looking at least a 3000, if not 4000 series sub in here, dual subs in here. You would not pair them with these things because these things are only reaching down to 29.
Right.
And so you're essentially saying, okay, what if I get one of the other more powerful subs? Then everything below 29 is either being the clips are making noises that are not right, or and also the SVS sub is the only one playing, so you're back down to a single sub.
We also cannot say with any confidence that putting a one-cylinder sub behind your couch, like along the wall where the windows are, and then a second SVS subwoofer on the front wall, we can't say with any confidence that actually is going to deliver uniform bass because it's a wide open room. The sound waves are creating patterns that we can't predict in here. So having it across the room from each other, generally, that's going to be a better thing when there's two parallel walls. But
it's not even across the room; it's across his space, and there's a kitchen behind him.
Yes.
So it's like there is not across a room.
There's no
predicting. So what I want to say is this: if you are happy with what you have right now, and you can live with the fact that you know that you are not hearing the lowest bass, and you will never hear the lowest bass in this room, but you're okay with that,
right?
Then leave well enough alone.
And he's already like, this is a clear upgrade to what I had before. But then that is also what has made him question, well, could it be even better? I mean, I am very much largely in agreement with Tom. I'm sort of the mind of, is there a spare room in this house that could become that's where you would go ham.
Yeah. Right. So if you said, I want to hear those low bass sounds. I want them, and I'm willing, then you have to be willing to say, okay, this may take me having to get a microphone, having to use Room EQ Wizard, having to get a mini DSP, having to do a bunch of things in order to try to fix this room, and then also maybe decide that after all this is done, there's so much bass in this area that everything in the kitchen rattles now. Whenever like literally everything. And if you think I'm joking, I am not. Nope. My children went behind my subwoofer, or somebody was cleaning or something like that, and hit the subwoofer volume on my EP500 when I was living in Jacksonville. The Axiom EP500 jacked the volume up like way up, and I was watching the first Transformers movies. That's how long ago this was. And literally every dish in my kitchen shook.
Right.
Every dish, and that was not just like, there's my room, and then my kitchen was behind me, like what you have. There was a room, a large opening, a dining room, a small opening, then kitchen. Okay, so we're talking quite amount of distance this air had to travel. And my wife was in the other room talking with her mom or something like that. She's like, "What is going on?" I was like, "Sorry, I don't know what's happening right now."
Yeah.
So. What Rob said is absolutely true. I would think to myself, if I were you, this is probably about as good as I'm going to get in this space. My next thought is, when are one of my kids leaving so I can turn that room into a home theater? When am I going to move again? And when I move again, I'm going to make sure I have a home theater room. And then that's when you do your big subwoofer upgrade. Because guess what? These subs, not good for that room. Okay? They don't go low enough. You know that. But maybe that's good for your space. Just live with the way it is right now, and just don't take 30 years to do it again.
Agreed.
All right, everybody ready to take a shot? Infinite Gary's got a question.
That should be just the center of the bingo card. But
yeah, Infinite Gary. Gary has come across a slight annoyance with his Lexicon MC12 Pre-Pro. Well, he's sending it back. That right now. It's gone. When he's watching sports, he sometimes likes to manually set the listening mode to mono or all-channel stereo to cut down on the crowd noise. He's found out that when they go to commercial, it automatically switches the listening modes. It usually says Dolby Digital, and then it stays there when it comes back to the game, forcing him to manually change the listening mode again. Is there a way to get it to stay in the listening mode that he wants, and why is it switching modes in the first place? You bought audiophile gear and this is what you have to deal with.
Well, the
I
switching
swear
in
to
the
God, that is the answer.
first place
That is the answer.
Probably because there's a switch between a 5.1 original signal and a still Dolby Digital, but Dolby Digital 2.0 signal. So that's probably the reason for the switch. Now, the thing is, I don't know if he has ever manually, so the commercial comes on, it does this automatic listening mode switch that has annoyed him. I don't know if at that moment, Gary, put it to the listening mode that you want the game to be in. Because as far as I'm aware, the lexicon will remember what listening mode you use for the type of signal. So it's still going to go blank for a second.
That doesn't make sense, because if that were true, then when it switched back to the game, it should go back to the listening mode he chose for the game the last time it was on. So if it doesn't remember that, it's not going to remember what you just said.
I would still,
audiophile gear, welcome.
I would still give that a try, because it's certainly worth a try. That's a simple enough thing to try. Yeah, it can't hurt. It can't hurt that, when the commercial comes on, and we suspect it's switching to Dolby Digital 2.0, put that to the mono listening mode, or the all channel stereo or all channel mono, whatever it is you're using. Put it to that, and then see if it's smart enough at that point to continue remembering from that point on. If not, gosh, okay, so I don't know. I'm not familiar with the lexicon menu structure.
Right.
Some AV receivers, if you dig into the user menu, it actually has the ability for you to set the default listening mode for each type of signal, but it's not going to make a distinction in there between Dolby Digital 5.1 and Dolby Digital 2.0. But on some AV receivers, they do have that in the user menu where it's like default. He only wants it
when he's watching sports, though.
Yeah.
That's just like so specific.
It is, yeah, and he wouldn't want it all the time, right? Now everything else that's a Dolby Digital signal that he doesn't want to listen to in mono will default to mono until he manually changes it. Yes, so I don't know that there's a great solution to this, Gary. But that
you put a speaker selector switch someplace in your system so that you can turn off your surrounds, and that's it. Then they're gone.
Yeah, I think that's about it, Gary. That's the best I got on that one. Sorry.
All right. Stephen in Australia. Stephen made his return to the cinema first time in a year. He watched A Quiet Place Part 2. I'm looking forward to it. It's got good reviews. I like the first one a lot. I even got my wife to watch it, which was interesting because she doesn't like horror movies. But I had her watch the beginning of it, and she got invested in the family, and that was it. She wanted to watch the rest. So at home, he's got a room that's roughly 19 by 21 by 9 and enclosed. Thank you for converting that from centimeters to feet for me, whoever did it, Rob or him.
It was in meters. I converted it.
Yeah. He uses a pair of SVS SB13 Ultra subwoofers and with Martin Logan Motion Series speakers all around in the 7.2 configuration. He had sort of forgotten the difference that a full-size cinema delivers. He can't exactly put his finger on it, but it just sounds big. It isn't just the bass. The bass he gets at home is just as loud and deep. In fact, it's probably better. But the mids and highs at the cinema somehow sound bigger too. Now, is that purely because of the size of the room, or does it have anything to do with the size of the speakers they are using? He's seen some YouTube videos where people installed JTR Crix speakers at home. Those speakers are physically huge. I do not like Crix speakers. I'm just going to say that. But anyways, physically huge, and they have very high sensitivity, and the people are always giddy after they hear them for the first time. So for his room, with switching to big speakers like those deliver the big sound that he had just experienced at the cinema. So psychologically, maybe.
There's some of that for sure, yes.
Hey, I would like you to point to the YouTube video that shows somebody installing new speakers in their system and then saying they suck. Okay, because it doesn't exist. They don't do that. They don't install the new big speakers. Oh, right. Yeah. You see, this is why I don't make YouTube videos, because I'd be like,
right,
whatever. So I have only reviewed one pair of Crix speakers, and I thought they were kind of crappy. I'll be honest with you. But I haven't heard JTR at all. So psychologically, there's a lot going on here. You're in a very big room. So the speakers are very far away. And things are going to sound a little bit more diffuse than you have at home.
And there's also literal reverb in a theater. Theaters, it depends on which theater you go to. Some are quite heavily treated, others are barely treated at all, or sometimes not at all. So it can definitely change depending on which cinema you go to, but there
Sure.
is actual reverb happening in a theater. It is big enough that there is a long enough time between the direct sound that came straight from the speaker versus the reflected sound that came off the various walls and ceiling and floor and seats and all of that. There's just enough time for that to be a long enough duration for your ear-brain system to put together that you are sitting in a large room.
Right.
And
right. The audio cues are there.
Yes,
and
that's
they're
right.
real.
Yeah,
they're not.
yes,
they're not
real.
forced by Yamaha's DSPs.
That's right.
They are real.
Yes.
So it sound your brain says, not only am I hearing the sounds I'm supposed to be hearing, but the audio cues around me let me know I am in a very big space.
And that
spaciousness is somewhat coming from that. This might be an argument for trying, instead of the game mode like we talked about last time, trying the movie mode, which gives you a little bit of that reverb.
That's its goal. That's the aim, is to try and trick your brain into thinking that you're in a bigger room than you are. That
so
is
the key here. The cure is just to buy a really big house.
Really big.
But you see what we're saying, right? So, those audio cues can be faked.
Yes.
But, when the audio cues and the visual cues that you have match up perfectly, because it's a real phenomenon that's going on around you, it sounds natural and it gives you that different sound than you're. So if you were to take the sound, the speaker sounds that you were hearing in that theater and just put it all in a smaller room with similar speakers or whatever, appropriately sized speakers and everything in a smaller space, you would be hearing the same thing you're hearing at home.
Right.
In theory.
Well,
I don't know
you
if it's
can
a different mix.
I don't know what theaters you have available to you in your local area, but like in my area, I've got somewhere they have big auditoriums.
Right.
They sit several hundred people, and then they have some quite compact theaters that don't even fit 100 people. And the difference in experience there is noticeable. You can tell that you're sitting in one of the smaller theaters versus one of the big auditoriums. You can absolutely tell that. And those are both commercial cinemas, but the room size difference is obvious. So, the notion that you're going to bring in physically large speakers to your home theater and get that same sense of I'm in a big room, like at the commercial movie theater, like we say, psychologically, seeing gigantic speakers might make you think some of that, adding some artificial, digitally created reverb to the sound might do a little bit of that, but you're not going to get to that same experience of actually being in a big room.
To my ears, it's better being at home because it's more
clearer.
defined.
Yeah, it's usually clearer.
Than it is in a cinema. I mean, aside from all the other things I hate about going to the cinema, which are numerous and been delineated over quite some time, but it's just clearer at home. It's much more delineated. Sounds move more convincingly around the space in my theater. You might not experience that. I don't see why you wouldn't with Martin Logan's and everything else you got going on. And I've said it before, and I'll remind that large speakers are meant for large rooms, and many times, the way that the speaker is designed, it's just like saying, can I put computer speakers in my home theater? They are designed to be listened to within a couple of feet, and anything outside of that, they don't mesh together very well. And a physically large speaker that is meant for a physically large room, you may not even be able to get really good stereo imaging out of them in a small space. Now, your room's not incredibly small, so it should be fine. But there's no world where I can believe you will go from your Martin Logan speakers and SVS subs and buy different larger speakers and say these sound bigger than my other ones, other than from a psychological standpoint.
Agreed.
JR. So let's sort through JR's music setup. Let's skip this one. I don't want to talk about this.
Too bad.
I don't even like this. I don't even like this guy. I don't even know who he is, but I don't like the cut of his jib.
We've talked to JR many times about his.
I don't like the cut of his jib, and I'm not talking about it. I'm skipping it. All right, to start, the rest of JR's family uses Apple Music, so that subscription is staying no matter what. Now, Rob, didn't I just read that Atmos is now available on iTunes or Apple players or something?
That's part of this thing, yes. There is.
Is it? Okay.
Atmos Music is now available through Apple Music.
Okay. So now, just for JR, he considers himself almost obsessive about even the slightest differences in sound quality. He spends hours every night listening to his music system, and he is certain he can hear tiny differences that all the research says is no better than a coin flip. So he has invested in a Blue Sound Note 2i network streaming device, and he connects that via coax cable to a Cambridge Audio DAC Magic to send an analog signal to his Denon receiver. And because, until just now, Apple Music was all lossy, he subscribed to Tidal. To him, their lossless and MQA tracks sound far superior to lossy Apple Music. He tried playing Tidal from his Apple TV 4K or from the Tidal app built into his LG OLED. Those were connected via HDMI directly to his Denon. Tidal did not sound as good to him this way. Playing Tidal via Blue Sound Node and Cambridge DAC Magic sounds better to him. But now Apple Music's entire library is available in lossless ALAC format. I call it ALAC. I don't know what's
Apple Lossless Audio Codec. That's the acronym.
Mm-hmm. And as mentioned, he's going to continue subscribing to Apple Music no matter what. So he's thinking he might be able to drop his Tidal subscription, but he wants to be 100% sure he is getting the maximum quality from Apple Music. So he's got an iPhone. He could use AirPlay 2 to stream Apple Music wirelessly to his Blue Sound node, but AirPlay 2 appears to be limited to 16-bit 44 kilohertz, or as we like to call it, the entire range of the human hearing. Most of Apple's music library is in CD quality, but some tracks are available in high res, up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz, and he doesn't want to give up a single bit. So how does he get those high-res lossless signals that he can't actually tell the difference of between other ones? Whatever.
He believes he can.
He believes he can, and it's not for me to say, even though I just did, and I was just making a joke. JR, you don't like the cut of my jib either, so I think we're in the same place here. I don't know what a jib is. Is it a shirt or a jacket? I feel like it's a jacket. I don't know. Most of the information says that if you use the native playback of an Apple device, it tops out at 24-bit 48 kilohertz. So how does he get the full 2496 or 24192 for tracks that are available that way? I'm absolutely positive you can get it from a computer. I mean, if you're going to, if nothing else, you should be able to get it from a laptop, a Mac laptop or something like that.
Yes.
But what did you say, Rob?
Yeah, so it is incredibly not clear, but you do have to use, well, okay, I'm not absolutely sure it has to be an Apple device. I'm not sure if this will work on Apple Music through a Windows device. Nobody's really tested it or talked about it yet because this change just happened on the day that we're recording it. All this lossless stuff coming out. But according to Apple's own support, you can definitely get the 24-bit 96 kilohertz or 24-bit 192 kilohertz from a Mac computer. And JR did mention one thing he was considering getting a Mac Mini anyway. That would work. So Mac Mini, USB output, to, in your case, I guess your DAC Magic. You'd send it directly to your DAC Magic because that's got a USB input. So that would definitely be a method. If you're going to get a Mac Mini anyway, that'll work. If you're going to do it from an iPhone or an iPad, it has to be a wired connection, right? Those have their Lightning or their USB-C connection. The USB-C connection on some of the iPad Pros, that should just work. But if it's the Lightning connection on your iPhone, it can't be the passive Lightning to USB cable. It has to be the Lightning to camera adapter USB because it has to be powered.
Obviously.
Obviously.
I don't know why you would even have to say that. I mean, clearly you would use a camera adapter when you're trying to listen to high-res audio.
Who wouldn't know that off the top of their head?
Who would assume that just by looking at the name of the cable?
And actually, JR even wrote back and he's like, "Yeah, I actually tried to use just the passive, the cable, the Lightning to USB charging cable that comes with, and his DAC Magic told him that the signal wasn't strong enough to work off of that. So he was already clued into that one. But yeah, that is the case. So it does have to be wired. It does have to be USB. And honestly, probably your easiest solution is to get the Mac Mini that you were considering getting anyway. That is probably the best way to do this. Because otherwise, if you're holding your iPhone in your hand and you got this long, you got to have the camera adapter first and then this long USB cable going to wherever your DAC Magic lives in your room. I'm like, that seems awkward to me, whereas the Mac Mini is just going to be nice. You can't, under any circumstances, get it from an Apple TV 4K. that one's going to top out at 48 kilohertz. That's as high as it goes. So there's no circumstance where the nice little compact Apple TV 4K is going to get this job done for you. So that's it. You're either going to use the honk weird, solution of the iPhone with a bunch of dongles on it, or you're going to get a Mac Mini.
So he says Apple is also offering Atmos music now. He doesn't listen to a lot of Atmos music, but Tidal offers some. And if he compromises and uses his Apple TV 4K to play Tidal, he can get those Tidal Atmos music tracks to show up as Atmos on his Denon receiver. Apple says their version is spatial audio with Dolby Atmos, and they mostly talk about using AirPods to hear it. So how does he send Atmos music to his Apple Music? Atmos music
from Apple Music, yes.
From Apple Music to his. Take a shot, DJ. That's the second one because he corrected me twice now. To his Denon, and if you were to use the analog outputs of his DAC Magic and then apply upmixing in his Denon, would that give him the correct Atmos music experience, or does Atmos music have to be a native digital signal? Okay, so if you downmix it to 2 channels so that you can send it analog,
indeed,
and then send it to your receiver will use the surround upmixer to upmix it, but would it sound exactly the same as the Denon,
as the original Atmos signal?
Atmos? No. There's just no chance.
No. And it would sound the same as any other stereo signal being upmixed by the Dolby Surround upmixer. So if you want to actually hear Dolby Atmos music from Apple Music on your Denon, you can't.
It's HDMI cable, right?
No,
you can't do it with the HDMI cable?
There is no method of getting Atmos from Apple Music to an AV receiver currently. There just is no way. The only way that you can hear the Atmos music tracks that are available through Apple Music is via AirPods or via HomePod wireless speakers from Apple. Very similar to what is happening with Atmos music from Amazon Music HD, where there is no way to hear it other than through Amazon's
doesn't really want to hear it anyways.
Echo Studio speakers. So Tidal is the only streaming service that has an Atmos music collection that you can actually hear through an AV receiver. That's the only service doing it, is Tidal. So if Atmos music is a priority, and he said it isn't, but if it were, then Tidal is what you want to stick with for now. Will Amazon and Apple update this at some point? I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. But right now, there is no way to do it. The spatial audio is a different thing. The spatial audio is where it actually uses the accelerometers in your AirPod earphones to track your head position. So that's the thing where it says, okay, right now you're facing forward, and then if you turn your head, it virtually locks the speaker position so that just like in real life, you turn your head and now your front speaker is, to your right ear if that's the way you turned your head. So that's what the spatial audio part of it is, and that only works with AirPods. So yeah, that's the situation on Atmos music from Apple Music. We actually have a question that's all about, hearing small differences. So I don't know if you wanted to dig into any of that with JR's question. I mean, we're not going to question what you've got going on, and this is the way that you want to do it. That's fine. We got no problem with that.
I would just warn you that switching from Tidal lossless to Apple lossless, there's about 1,000 different things that could.
There's much going on, and I mean the one I can't.
The last thing I would blame it on is the bit rate. Okay, I'll put you that way. There's 1,000 things that can make you hear a difference, and the last one would be the bit rate.
Sure. The one I can't really let go is MQA.
I know. MQA is
Master
horrible.
Quality Authenticated Audio. Okay, so I don't want to say anything that's going to get us sued because Meridian is a really litigious company. One of the issues is that if there is a track on Tidal that is available in MQA format, it is only available in MQA format. They don't give you the option of unless you go to the lossy version, but they don't give you an option of choosing a like a FLAC or just completely uncompressed lossless. So there's no choice. If it's available in MQA, that's the only version that's there. And it has been objectively shown by a few different artists who they mastered their own music. And then since MQA and Tidal don't allow an independent artist to upload their own music to the Tidal service. You have to go through a publisher. They took their music that they made to a publisher, had the publisher upload it to Tidal, then they downloaded their own track. They're like, I made and recorded this. I know what the master is. And when they got it back from Tidal in MQA format, it was not the same, and they would not have authenticated it, and yet it still lit up MQA and put the little blue light on that said, this has been master quality authenticated. They're like, I made this, I didn't authenticate it, and I wouldn't authenticate it because the same thing that I sent didn't come back to me.
Right.
More than that, like Amir made a whole video on it from Audio Science Review. He's like, if you don't have an MQA decoder, and one of the things about MQA is that it comes to you in CD quality with additional metadata. The MQA metadata is on there. So if you don't have an MQA decoder, it's just supposed to play back in standard CD quality. He's like, when you do that, there's noise that wouldn't be there in just the CD version. There's noise in the signal as a result. Now, most of it is like above 16 kilohertz, so the chance that you're actually going to hear it is really, really slim. But some of it is in the 16 to 20 kilohertz range, which is still technically within the audible part of the frequency spectrum. It's not all above 20 kilohertz. So objectively speaking, what you're getting without an MQA decoder is worse. Like, will you hear it? I really don't think so, but it's there. There's noise there that wouldn't be there without MQA. And then when MQA is actually used, actual artists are saying, like, I wouldn't have authenticated this, but they're saying it's authenticated. So there you go. I'll leave it at that. That's all. I don't think you're necessarily getting better quality because it says MQA.
Yeah. Lance has been trying out a bunch of different OLED TV models. He was previously comparing an LG CX to a Sony A9G. Now he's up to a LG C1. Being able to play games in 4K 120 with VRR definitely looks super clean, but to get it, he has to plug his Xbox Series X directly into the TV because this receiver is a Marantz SR7012, and that means he has to use eARC, and he's got some confusion.
How dare you, sir? It's all so easy.
Older, right? The 7012 is older, quite a bit older, right?
Yeah, SR7012 is a bit older.
Yeah, he doesn't have the...
It does have eARC, but it does not have 4K 120 or VRR pass-through.
Right. So he previously heard a very noticeable difference between the sound of the CX versus the Sony A9G. He thought that maybe had something to do with the differences between the sound systems built into the two TVs, but we insisted that the built-in speaker shouldn't make any difference whatsoever if he's using eARC with his Marantz receiver. Nevertheless, the CX just sounded better. He can't get the new C1 to sound the same. What settings does he need to adjust in order to get the best audio quality out of his C1 OLED? Well, I mean, the one thing that would make me think that one would sound different than anything else, because it should just be sending the signal down.
It should.
If it's somehow down mixing it, I mean, which could be the case, or if the TV speakers are on,
we thought about that too, that the TV speakers are still on, and yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be this hard, but unfortunately, there's no. This is what it is. So I don't blame anybody for having confusion and not getting the results that they wanted. Let's start with the TV, the C1 TV. You bring up the settings. There is the sound section. Under sound out, there's a whole plethora of choices because that thing's got WISA built in, and it can output via Bluetooth, and it's got optical and HDMI and a whole bunch of things. So you want to make sure that the sound out of the C1 OLED is set to HDMI ARC and nothing else. Not HDMI ARC plus internal speakers, not HDMI ARC plus optical, just HDMI ARC. And that is one of the choices, that and that alone. But that is not the end of the story, because under sound, there are additional settings, and the ability to turn eARC on and off is buried in there in the additional settings. If you don't turn it on, you're stuck at regular ARC, which means that things that were Dolby Digital Plus or Dolby True HD or multi-channel PCM, those were getting down converted to Dolby Digital, just vanilla Dolby Digital. And that might have been what was going on when you were comparing the C10 to the Sony A9G, because maybe the Sony A9G was down converting everything to regular Dolby Digital and didn't have eARC activated, and the C10 did, or some such thing like that. Entirely possible because, as I say, it's buried inside of these additional settings. So you want to turn eARC on. Now, that's just the TV side of things. Over on the AV receiver side, I am going to strongly recommend turning HDMI control, because that's what Marantz labels it as, off. Now, to get to that, you have to go into the Marantz's settings and go to the video section. Because, I mean, we're only talking about audio here with audio return channel, but the HDMI settings are all buried within the video section. So you go into video and you go into HDMI setup. That's where you can turn HDMI control off, and I would recommend doing that, but turn audio return channel on, because of course that's what we're using. Now, there's another setting in there that's called TV audio switching. Once you turn HDMI control off, TV audio switching should automatically get grayed out, because that should only be available if HDMI control is on. But on the off chance that somehow it's still selectable, I would also recommend turning that off, TV audio switching off. Now, the catch is you will have to manually press on your Marantz's remote the TV audio button. Like, that is in the inputs section. So, like, if you were switching to your BD DVD input or your cable sat input, TV audio is another one of the inputs that you can select, and that activates the HDMI audio return channel. That's the manual way to turn that on. And that's the way I would recommend doing it, because Lord knows HDMI CEC, HDMI control, and automatically turning on HDMI audio return channel is flaky as can be. That's why I recommend turning control off and TV audio switching off, and then manually choosing TV audio as your input. That should work. That is getting you the highest quality signal possible out of your LG OLED. That is, what I can say as far as what the signal that'll be sent, that will be the best quality signal with those settings.
Okay. He plays movies from his HTPC. He's seeing judder on the C1. It didn't used to look that bad on his older C7. What settings will remove this judder? That sounds like one of those picture interpolation things.
Yeah. So one of the issues is what frame rate is your HTPC sending out? Because if your home theater PC is sending out 60 hertz, which is normal, that's usually what an HTPC is going to be sending out, is 60 hertz, then 60 hertz will have, there's no way of getting away from it, it will have that 3-2 cadence. It's going to show one frame or half of a frame 3 times and the other one twice, and that's what creates judder. So if you have the option in your home theater PC, make sure your home theater PC is outputting. If it has the option to output, it'll be labeled in your PC as 23 hertz, because they don't show the decimals after decimal points afterwards.
23.9 something.
Yeah, it's 23.976, which gets rounded up to 24. But usually PCs, when you're choosing your output resolution and frame rate, they'll give you the option of 23 and 24, and you actually want the 23 choice, because in truth it's 23.976, and that's the one you want. So you have to start there in your home theater PC and make sure it's outputting 23.976. Now, as soon as you do that, you shouldn't have any judder on your OLED anymore. That should be gone. Now, moving your mouse around is going to look like it's laggy and not very clear, because when everything is coming out of your PC at only 23.976 hertz, it's not a smooth looking thing, but your movies will play without judder. If you absolutely don't want to do that, and regardless anyway, in the OLED, if you go into the picture settings, they've buried it in the clarity section on the C1 now. The previous models didn't have a clarity section, but the C1s have a clarity section under the picture settings now. And under there is a setting called Cinema Screen, which is a new name. It didn't used to be called that on the old OLEDs, but now it's called Cinema Screen under Clarity. You want that on, and what that will do is detect film cadence. It will detect when it's 23.976 hertz. It will detect if you're coming from a cable source that's like 1080i 60. It'll detect the inverse telecine, and it'll convert that back to 24p. So you want cinema screen on. It's buried under the clarity section. And under the true motion section, which is also within clarity, I mean, turning it off is pretty safe. That's probably what you want to do, is just turn true motion off. But there's a weird little glitch in some of the LG OLEDs where, in order, if you're sending 23.976 hertz out of your PC, you actually want to turn true motion to user and just make sure both of the sliders are at 0, because that will actually give you each frame gets shown to you 5 times in a row and nothing else, which is actually what you want with a 23.976 hertz signal. So true motion to user, both sliders to 0, and cinema screen on. Settings. I mean, who wouldn't know that, Tom, off the top of their head? Who wouldn't?
I won't know it because I wasn't listening to any of that.
Who wouldn't just
Sounds
press
very
the
complicated.
The gear icon on their LG remote and go, of course, that's what the settings would be. It's so intuitive.
Very intuitive. Andrew bought the mono-price monolith HTP1 Pre-Pro. First up, he wanted to mention that he paid the extra to get DRAC Live bass control. He upgraded to a total of 4 subs, and we are spot on when we say the bass control program really needs at least 3 subwoofers to do its thing. He got a big improvement going from 2 subs to 3, and with 4 subs, 2 up front, 2 at the back. It's excellent. Anyways, the HTP1's calibration settings. It has max output level adjustment, which lets you set the highest voltage that will come out of its pre-outs. This is to allow you to match the output voltage of the HTP1 to the input voltage needed by your amplifiers to reach their full wattage. It can go from 1 to 4 volts. So Andrew has 2 different amplifiers connected. One is the mono-price Monolith 7X. It lists its input sensitivity for full rated power at 1.6 volts in its specs. Then he also has a 5-channel OSD Nero XA5180, whatever, 5180, that lists its input sensitivity as just 1 volt. How should he set that max output level? He's tried simply playing the built-in pink noise and measuring the output level with SPL Meter, but at 2.4 volts, it was still only reading 68 dB. That doesn't seem quite right, that he should have to set the max output level even higher than that. When both apps have specs saying that they need a lot less voltage, what's the correct procedure here? So what this has to do with is, because the monoprice is a pre-pro, the output voltage it affects the volume and sometimes the auto on function of different amplifiers. Sure. So, you turn your amplifier on, you put it so that if it doesn't receive anything, it goes into shutdown or into a standby mode. If your input voltage isn't high enough, it won't turn back on. So that's why sometimes with subwoofers we'll say, if your sub's not turning on, isn't going auto on, then you increase the volume. You decrease the volume of sub and you increase the trim level on the receiver. And what that does is increase the voltage that's coming out so that the auto on function will work. I don't know what the right answer here is. I mean, I've never even heard of this before, but I have, but it's very unusual. So if it were me, I would put it at 2 or something and leave it there, because it seems like what I would want to go it can take more and but I don't know that I think that's what I would do. I just set it at 2 and call it good.
Yeah, it's an interesting that it even has that setting. It's sort of like a residual from some of the development of the HTP1, because it was developed by ATI, and they used to have a partnership with DTS, and they used to make like the cinema processors for DTS, some of them anyway. They had a platform, and it's all kind of a residual leftover from that pro side of things, where they were connecting things to pro amps that were really picky about the voltage that was sent to them. And that's sort of why that's still there. And I mean, the idea is you could use the HTP1 with pro amps that are that kind of picky to the input voltage that gets sent to them. Consumer amps, like, think about it this way. If you were to pick up a Marantz Pre-Pro, it doesn't have this setting. It doesn't have this max output level or this, preamplifier voltage output level setting. It's not in there. And, when someone like Gene over at Audioholics measures the maximum voltage that can come out of a Marantz pre-pro or even just, a Denon receiver through its RCA pre-outs and just measures the maximum voltage that can come out of there, it's 4 volts. That's what can come out of there. And that's the maximum setting that you can put on this HTP-1 as well. Now, generally what you'll find is that all the way up to 2.2, 2.4 volts, there's no distortion in effect. I mean, obviously nothing is perfect, but in effect. And then once you go above 2.2 or 2.4 volts, the distortion starts to creep up a little bit. And I think the reason he was at 2.4 volts with the HTP-1, he mentioned that. I'm pretty sure that's the default when you just take it out of the box, that's the default setting. Honestly, there's no reason to change it from the default. You could put it at 2.2 or 2.4. Like I say, above that is when distortion might start to creep in. But at that point or lower, there isn't anything there. And you're not going to do any harm to your monolith amplifier or to your outdoor speaker depot amplifier. Both of those have XLR inputs. They're perfectly fine to connect to the HTP-1, and you're not going to do any harm to them. They don't need that maximum voltage to reach their full rated power, but nothing bad is going to happen. The matching them so that the levels that come out of your speakers are all equal, that's all done by the trim levels. That's all done when you do direct setup or if you manually set the trim levels. You do have to keep in mind, he didn't mention every variable that was going on when he had it set to 2.4 and then was just measuring the pink noise, because that pink noise test tone, it is affected by the master volume dial. Did you have the master volume dial turned all the way up to 0 dB? It is affected by the trim levels in addition to this max output level. So did you already run Dirac and it set trim levels and then you started messing with the max output level setting, because those two things affect one another? So I would honestly, whatever the default was out of the box, and I'm pretty sure it is the 2.4 that you mentioned, just leave it there. There's really no reason to touch it with a consumer amplifier. And then let the trim levels adjust themselves so that you have equal volume coming from all of your speakers at your main seat.
Okay. Reginald, I think this might be my last one. I think my wife got home and I need to get going.
Yeah.
And I can hear my son's phone going off every 20 minutes to remind him to go switch ice packs and stuff. So I'd like to get out there and check on my son. Reginald, we were going to read Reginald's email verbatim at first and then hopefully try to reinterpret the real meat of what he's asking after some comments and clarifications.
Yeah, I did reply to his email, basically like asking, did you want to read, because I'm happy to read it exactly as he wrote it, and address some things that I think need to be addressed in there, or if you wanted to reword it. I didn't hear back in time, so we're going to take the question as it was and respond to it. That's the best we can do.
Okay, so this is his statement, and so I guess there's a couple of statements here. 2 statements, yeah. Separate components sound better than receivers by far. Do you have any proof that separate components don't sound better than receivers? So that's his thing.
Yeah, that was the email that came. That's it verbatim there.
Okay. So I get a lot of this over the course of my career in AV. A lot of stuff. I just had somebody accuse me of being a Best Buy employee on AV gadgets. I'm like, I don't know. I thought he was talking about a different article, and then I read the article that he was talking about. I'm like, I don't know how you came to this conclusion. Nostradamus. Yes. Tell me more about myself.
That's also,
and
I don't know. I'm
assuming
they meant that as a slight, but it should be a slight.
He said,
very good Best Buy employees.
It was 2 statements. You're a Best Buy employee. You must be a Best Buy employee, and that's not a compliment. I'm like,
I see.
Okay, well, I guess you do you. Separates. So the ongoing and long-standing thought process behind within the AV community is that separates are by definition better than receivers. This stems from years and years and years ago, when separates were all we had. We had processors and we had amplifiers, and that was it. And then somebody came out with a receiver. And the minute that somebody
we had integrated amplifiers first, which combined the pre-processing and the amplification, and then receivers also put a source in there in the form of a radio tuner. And that's when it became a receiver instead of just an integrated amplifier.
So, as anything else, I mean, we've talked about this now, I think 3 times on this podcast, about how when technology first comes out, it's not always very good. Sometimes a little janky, it doesn't work so well. And back then, it was fairly well known and probably true that receivers integrated amps, when they first hit the market, were not as good as separates, which had been around for longer. So this continued on throughout time until today, where separates are still considered far superior. You can see that statement being made over and over again,
and it's
online.
even almost taken as a truism a lot of places.
It's just the way it is.
Sure.
Now, there are lots of objective measurements, and Audioholics has done this quite a bit, that show that the preamp section on AV receivers are just as good, if not better, than the preamp sections in many high-end, multi-$1,000 more expensive pre-pros.
And particularly, I mean, Gene at Audioholics, Amir at Audio Science Review, they've been really pleased with the 2020 model year Denon Amaranths that came out, that we're talking AV receivers here, that have that preamp mode, where it actually cuts all power to the amplifier sections. And they're like, if you look at what is the distortion levels that are now coming out of the RCA pre-outs of these mass market AV receivers, they are objectively, in every measurable way, better than the vast majority of dedicated pre-pros. So, I mean, that if he was asking for some evidence on that part alone, we'll just mention that. We're going to build as we go here.
We're going to build. So what happens here, and we can go all the way back to James Randi and his $1 million cable challenge, right? James Randi made the claim, high-end speaker cables or high-end cables make no difference, do not make sound better. And you can't tell the difference between them anyways. So if you can come in here and I can take a consumer level speaker cable, and you can plug in whatever cable you want to plug in, and we can tell the difference. After objectively measuring them, if you can still hear the difference, then I'll give you $1 million. That prize has never been claimed. It's still around. It's a lot harder to go out there, because it used to be that people would show up at the door and just say, I'm going to test it, and they never, it still has never been paid out. The reality here is that when you come at me and say, this is better than this, and you're saying, and I'm saying there is no difference between these two things, and you can't tell the difference, it's not on me to prove to you that you can't tell a difference.
So, I mean, this is this is just getting into a bit of the wording, just the semantics, the way the words were arranged. Because, I mean, I just want to have it addressed, because we're not here to attack Reginald or to defend ourselves even.
He's attacking us, but whatever. Go on.
Well, I mean, that's our interpretation. We don't know what the true, that's why I asked if you wanted to clarify it all, because, sometimes the way the words come out is not what you actually intended. But all that aside, Reginald is certainly not the only person to ever phrase a question this way, and we want to address it a little bit, because that idea of proving a negative, the one I can always, the easy example is, prove to me that ghosts don't exist. Prove that they don't exist, right? We have to say, okay, the default is, we don't think ghosts truly exist. We have to prove that they do, right? You can't prove a negative, right? Prove to me that there
hypothesis.
Prove to me that there are no extraterrestrials anywhere in the universe. Prove it to me. It's no, prove to me that there are. Right? So it would be easy enough to just flip it around and say, okay, what he meant was, is there evidence that separates do sound better than receivers? But I don't think that is truly the tone and the meat of the question. I don't think that is what he's really asking, that there's evidence that separates do sound better. The way it was phrased, I think it's coming from, we give out recommendations. Somebody asks, hey, I want to upgrade. Should I upgrade to separates? And we almost, not always, but almost always say no. There are definite. And so, I mean, one other thing I want to just touch on is this being the internet, things tend to go to the extremes. It's 0 or 10 and nowhere in between. And so if we most often say, no, we're not going to tell you to get a separate amplifier. No, we're not going to tell you to get a separate setup. We do have nuance in our answers. Sometimes we do tell somebody to get a separate amplifier.
We do sometimes, that's right. Especially, and not only just because they want to power their front threes.
Right.
It's often because they are trying to use all 11 channels in their receiver, and that receiver has a known problem where if you power more than 9 speakers or 7 speakers with it, you introduce noise into you have a noise floor and just some distortion that will happen because of it. So if you just take and then again, just people are going to take this how they want. I'm going to suggest that you get the a low power amplifier that doesn't cost very much and use it to power your overheads or whatever. Right. Whereas most people are like, well, why wouldn't you get a big amp and power your front threes? That'll really make the biggest difference. But then again, I would say, you try it your way, I'll try it my way. You tell me, you show me where you can hear a difference, because I'm going to tell you you're not going to.
Big seating distance, low sensitivity speakers, we're going to say, yeah, it's going to make sense. Power your front 3 with the external amps. So
get your electrostatic speakers out, man. Come on, bring your electrostatic speakers over here. I'll tell you to get an amp.
So there is nuance in there. We aren't all or nothing. I do completely understand when some people hear someone say something that they've heard before from other places that are all or nothing, and they go, oh, Tom and Rob are saying the same thing as that other group, and kind of tune out, right? I get that. We got a long podcast. You're not going to listen to every word, but for us defending ourselves, there's the nuance in there. Now, the other part I wanted to get to, obviously, I don't think he's meaning there is no instance of a receiver ever sounding better than separates, because of course there's going to be a single instance somewhere in recorded history where that was just objectively true in any way. So I think he's taking the general stance, right?
I guarantee you, I could take some separates. I could go find some separates right now. I could plug them in and plug in an almost entry level AV receiver, and the AV receiver will sound better. I guarantee you, I can make that happen.
Or if you took what is by all accounts, by everybody, even audiophiles, the best AV receiver that's out there, and put it against the worst, separate component. And so I don't think that's what he was meaning either, right? We've only got what he wrote to go on at this time, but so we're not going to address it from that side of view. But I think what I suspect, and I'm putting some of my own in here, but I suspect some of what happened here is at some point Reginald was using a sound system that had an AV receiver, and he upgraded to separates. Or maybe he's just heard it in a store or whatever at a friend's house and heard a difference when it went from receiver to separates. And from that experience, plus this truism that's out there in the audiophile community, concluded that, okay, separates sound better than receivers. And here come Tom and Rob, and almost always saying, no, they don't. Or, if you are going to get an external amplifier, we would use a receiver as the pre-pro. We wouldn't go to a separate pre-pro, a dedicated pre-pro, because they cost more and don't supply any additional features for that money. The issue is, first of all, how many variables were changed. Because if it was more than one, we can't say for sure what made the difference. But more than that, if you say the only thing in this system that was changed was going from a receiver to separates, that in itself is more than one variable. And that's the real problem, because it's very difficult to objectively discern what actually made the difference in the sound. Let's assume that the difference really was real, that there's nothing about psychoacoustics involved in here, that it was a true difference, completely audible. If you're saying, I only changed one thing, I changed from receivers to separates, so therefore that must have been the thing that caused the difference, the separates themselves have multiple variables in there, because there's all the setup procedure that's going on, right? Was it actually the same volume, right? When you did the decoding, did one of them use an up mixer and the other one used, one of them used the movie up mixer and one of them used the music up mixer? Mainly
volume
it's the volume
changes,
thing, but was there room correction? Did you run Audyssey on the receiver and then you ran it pure when you went to the separates and you heard a difference? Yeah, I believe you heard a difference in that instance, right? So,
hi, Mike.
It's a problem in the structuring of the question, because to really drill down to, is there proof that separates don't sound better than receivers? It's man, we got to try and isolate variables, and it becomes a really tricky proposition.
Right. Which is what when we do psychological testing, and I don't mean on a person, but on groups of people or on phenomenon, when we're trying to figure out what is causing a phenomenon, and there's so many things that are out there that we test all the time, but because of COVID and everything else, one of the things that we're worried about are side effects, right?
Right.
So when you oh my God, this camera is killing me. When we are trying to the biggest part is not doing the test. The biggest part is not giving people a vaccine and then seeing how they feel afterwards. That's not the hard part. That's the easy part. What the hard part is, and where all the statistics and all the data and all the researchers, all that stuff is making clearer connections between what happens with just between the shot and the side effect, and whether or not there are any other biases, any other links that might be out there to affect that. So, when you hear them talk about how 8 people in 8 million shots had a heart problem, that's literally a 1 in a million effect that they were able to say with some idea that there might be a causal link between the two, which means that anything that was more prevalent than that would have been picked up way sooner. So, but to do that, it takes lots of knowledge, lots of control, and lots of data. And we don't buy new receivers every year. We don't upgrade our unless you're Infinite Gary. We don't upgrade our components monthly. So somebody takes their old receiver that they got from their dad or something and then buy separates. And they're like, oh my God, this sounds so much better. And I'll go the reverse way. Has a new receiver and their dad says, here are my old separates, and gives them the separates. What's making the difference here? Like Rob said, there's a lot of different little variables here, but even in the reverse, where you have an older pair of separates and you plug it in and you're like, oh my God, this sounds so much better. Is it because it's separate, or is it because of there is actual EQ going on because this older gear isn't as flat and it doesn't,
something has a non-linearity in it, but you actually like that
but
non-linearity.
It works out, and you're like Mr. Clip's subwoofer guy. Right. How many times do we suggest getting bigger subwoofers when you have a big room? All the time. And we're this guy, we're like, yeah, don't poke it. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
There's something that could be there, but you might be inviting more problems along with it. I mean, all of this talk about gathering the statistical data, this leads to, I'm going to have a whole bunch of links, and
I didn't even look at any of your links down here. I scrolled all the way back up the top.
The links that I'm providing are actually lists of blind listening tests. Now, not all of them are, receiver versus separates. In fact, I don't think I came across a single one that was literally receiver versus separates. We did come across the test that Tom Nussain did, years ago, where it was separates versus integrated amplifier. That's
close enough.
That's pretty darn close. Separates versus integrated amplifier. Now, the point of having these lists of multiple blind listening comparisons, we can't say literally all of them came out with the result of people couldn't statistically tell the difference. There are a handful where people could, but the vast majority in multiple different situations, whether it's cables, whether it's amplifiers, whether it's DACs, all of these ones, the vast majority is, statistically speaking, when people didn't know which one they were listening to. And some of my favorites are the one where it never changed and people still swore up and down that they heard a difference, and it was literally the same thing being tested every time. There's some examples of those in there too. So, that's the data. We say, where's the proof that separates don't sound better than receivers? Okay, that's as good as we can do, are these lists upon lists of blind listening comparisons where the vast majority people can't hear the differences that they thought that they could. But flipping it all back around, I'm assuming that some of this is coming, and again, total assumption on my part, but I'm assuming that some of this is coming on Reginald's parts from, at some point, he heard the difference. So that's what's convinced him. He made the change, he heard the difference. And Tom and I will say, okay, well, we've had experiences where we switched, or we did it under audition, or we tested, or it was blind, or it wasn't blind, and we didn't hear a difference. And that's the experience that we're sharing. But then one of them says, well, I heard a difference. That's all the proof I need. You didn't hear a difference, but you need more than that. I'm not going to believe you. I'm not going to take you at your word for it, right? So again,
I'm not the one trying to convince you, buddy. Right. I mean, you came on my podcast and told me something. If you're happy with your separates, go on your merry way. No one's making you try to buy something else.
Yes, I mean, again, ultimately, this is one of the things, we've mentioned this multiple times when Infinite Gary has asked questions, because he'll say, okay, I switched from this component to this one, and we're all aware, Gary's aware and we're aware that there are multiple variables going on. And he'll say, okay, I heard this difference between the two things. And we'll say, okay, look, there is a way through settings and measurement to get these two things sounding the same. But we have no problem with, I took this one out of the box, and right out of the box with very little fiddling, it sounds the way I like. And this other one, I took it out of the box, and yeah, maybe there's a way to get it sounding the way I like, but out of the box it doesn't. And I don't want to put in the effort to make it sound the way I want. I'm fine with understanding that it can, but I'm going to take the one that out of the box already sounds the way I want it to. We have no problem with that. No problem whatsoever. But if someone is asking, is this intrinsic? Is this something that can't be made to sound the way that I want it to sound? And we're going to say, no, it might take effort. It might take more effort than you want to put in and more time than you want to put in. But no, that is just not an intrinsic quality. So the last bit I want to say about this, just on a logical basis, a thought experiment basis, right? We've got these multiple blind listening comparisons saying, okay, strictly on amplifiers, right? Strictly on amplifiers, there are the blind listening comparisons where when they get them to the edges, right? You're getting to the output capability of one amp and the second amp has plenty of headroom to spare, or on the opposite side, on the noise floor side, or on the distortion or the signal to noise ratio side, where the differences become audible. And we got no problem with that. Makes perfect sense. You're at the edges of it. So you're going to say, okay, in the receiver's case, I've got an amplifier which objectively, measurably, specs-wise, is not as powerful as this other external amplifier that I could connect. And I'm connecting it in a large room to electromagnetic speakers that are really difficult to drive and dip down to 1 ohm. And I heard a difference, and we're like, yeah, totally makes sense. And that's where that it's not all or nothing thing comes in. But let's assume that you're in a small room, easy to drive speakers, you're not pushing either amplifier. You're going to say that just by virtue of putting the amplifiers in a separate box and connecting them with physically longer cables to the preamplifier section, that is inherently always all the time going to sound superior than having those amplifiers connected via traces on a board inside the same chassis. That it's the length of the cable between the preamplifier section and the amplifier section that made the difference. Because if we're going to make the claim that separates by far always sound better than receivers, take the size of the room and the sensitivity of the speakers out of the equation, they just always sound better because they're separates. That's the argument that's being made. The argument being made is that it's the length of the electrical connection between the preamplifier section and the amplifier section. That's what made the difference. And just thought experiment-wise, that doesn't make sense. The shorter connection...
It does if you believe cables make a difference.
Well, that's getting all... And those are all in the blind listening comparisons, too. Lots of them, cable comparisons. But thought experiment-wise, that's the other way that I come at this, is saying that's the difference, and how does that... Logically, how does that even make sense? And it doesn't. So, there you go. We don't have proof. We have no proof that separates don't sound better than receivers, because... we're not able to prove the negative. I can't prove to you that ghosts don't exist. But we can look at the blind listening comparisons. We can look at the objective preamplifier section only, where the receivers are just as good and now in many cases superior. And we'll take those along with our experience that just getting separates is not guaranteeing you better sound quality.
All right. Who's left?
We have Mike on the list, and that's it.
All right, Mike. I'd like to thank our listeners of the week, and then thank Jack, Lance, and Jack, a different Jack, for going to avrant.com by leaving us a cup of coffee, clicking on the cup of coffee link and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 124 patrons over at patreon.com, including Daniel, Jack, and Andrew.
Indeed, Jack, Lance, and Jack, thank you very much for those PayPal donations. Really do appreciate the financial support. And patreon.com/AVRant Podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Thank you very much to our 124 patrons over there, including Daniel, Jack, and Andrew.
I want to thank Gurinder for talking us up to JVC, as well as Jack and Andrew for sending me photos with permission to use them on the AV Gadgets.
For sure. Gurinder, do hope that JVC projector gets fixed for you. Now you're armed with evidence from Ara and Brandon and Carl, and thank you to them once again for sending in their experiences. Jack and Andrew, thank you for giving Tom permission to use your photos on avgadgets.com.
And for notes of gratitude from Daniel, Jack, again, Jay, Albert, Shannon, Stephen, Andrew, and Mike for keeping the podcast going. You guys are welcome, and we'll keep doing it as long as you keep listening.
Yes, indeed. Say it one more time. Daniel, Jack, Jay, Albert, Shannon, Stephen, Andrew, and Mike. Do appreciate those notes of gratitude and encouragement. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.